Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Blues and Jazz Dance Book Club's live lecture with Tad Walters. I'd like to just take a minute to introduce Tad. Tad Walters is a blues musician from Raleigh, North Carolina. He started his professional career at 17 and has played with many of the legends of the genre, including Bob Margolin, Pinetop Perkins, Billy Boy Arnold, Dave Myers, John Jackson, John D Holeman, Big Bill Morganfield, Willie Smith, Hubert Sumlin, and many others. Tad is quite adept at all the different styles of blues and takes great pride in his own songs, such as Cold-Blooded Murder and Break 'Em On Down. Tad leads his own band and also plays by himself. So if you get the chance to listen to him play live, definitely go out and see him. And we'll turn the time over to Tad now.
All righty. Well, I appreciate y'all showing up for this thing. I started out playing the background on what I do, how I got to where I'm at. I started playing music, playing guitar when I was 11 or 12, something like that. So, comes to Delta blues. I know this is an emphasis on Delta blues. My uncle, for one Christmas, I might have been 89, maybe 88 or something like that. Whenever that 2 CD record came out of Robert Johnson, he got me that for Christmas, and that got me. I didn't really like it much at first, but then I started listening to it. Wow, this guy is really good. He's got 3 things going on at the same time on the guitar. And I started studying that stuff, and I got real deep into the Delta blues. Like a guy named Charlie Patton was the guy that was kind of the foundation of it. He took the music and made it something into. You might could say he's the kingpin of the Delta blues. A lot of people learned from him. He was kind of like a rock star at that time in the Delta. The Delta being in Mississippi, Arkansas. I said Mississippi. Down there they call it Mississippi, so you don't pronounce the other IS. But Arkansas, Louisiana, and even maybe it goes from Memphis down to say around Jackson or so, and what it really is like a floodplain, and where they mainly grew cotton and some corn and soybeans and stuff like that. But it was a farming area, and it's where the Mississippi would flood into this region. But anyhow, they had agriculture there. And it had people working in there back then. They had, people would pick the cotton and do. I mean, you had to have people, and then when agriculture got mechanized, well, that put a lot of people out of work. So a lot of people moved out of there, and we'll say back in I'll say the 30s. A friend of mine from Chicago, Billy Boy Arnold. He was born in Chicago, but his people were from Mississippi. So I don't want to get too far ahead, but a lot of people moved from the South up north, let's say Chicago, St. Louis, Kansas City, to find work, factory jobs, and Chicago had the stockyards, and Cleveland had the steel mills, and Pittsburgh had the steel mills, and a lot of people from that area moved up north, and they took their music with them. So as technology progressed, we got electrical instruments and drum kits and all that kind of stuff, and that's going to change the music. If you listen to music today, you can hear a lot of I guess you could call it technical advances. I don't think of it that way, but it's a way to look at it. But anyhow, with the music and what I learned growing up is I sat in my room and I had it wasn't this guitar, but I had my guitar. I'd listen to the records and try to figure that stuff out because it really struck a chord with me, which it seems to strike a chord with people. It's very powerful music. It's if I guess if you have a soul, it'll hit you that way. But when I was about 17 years old, and can y'all hear me all right? Can you hear me?
Yep, we've got you.
Okay,
Yeah.
making sure I didn't hear anything. I didn't hear any noise. So
yeah, we have our microphones muted so that it doesn't keep switching back and forth between you and other people as ambient noises jump.
I got you. Okay. Oh, anyhow, so I was about a kid, and 17 years old. I went out and did this blues contest, and I got second place one year, and then went back the next year and got first place. I said, "Oh, I'm going to make sure I win the thing next time." But one of the judges was Bob Margolin, and he was Muddy Waters' guitar player back in the '70s. And if you don't know who Muddy Waters is, you should definitely look him up because he is the one of the most important musical originators in the world, in the history of music, I would say. So Bob, I hooked up with him, and I went on the road with him, and I got to play with him. He played with Muddy, played with Billy Boy Arnold, Pinetop. We'll go ahead and I'll get into Pinetop here shortly. But we got to play. I got to play with a bunch of these people that play with Muddy Waters and Chicago guys, and a bunch of, or some of the guys from Mississippi sometimes, and they're kind of funny. The Mississippi Delta stuff, there's, I'll just say this on top is when you categorize music, it takes away a lot. Because everything bleeds into each other. I don't care what kind of music it is. It always bleeds into something else, and it just moves around and it turns into a new sound. The Mississippi stuff, I'll just call it Mississippi music because if you go to the Delta, there's little pockets of musicians because back then you didn't have a whole lot of transportation. You certainly didn't have the internet, and you would have people would go from town to town. Charlie Patton, like I said before, was the first guy in the Delta to he didn't work. He didn't have to work. He would just go around from plantation to plantation where people were at, and on Saturday night they would have usually what I heard was a Friday night, Friday morning, something like that. And they'd just have a party all weekend because they'd been out and working the whole time, and Charlie Patton was the entertainer for them usually. And Charlie Patton, let's name a couple other guys that were very important to the sounds. There was a couple of little hubs around there where the musicians would gather and learn from each other. One of them was a place called Clarksdale, and another one was a place called Drew, Mississippi. Drew, Mississippi was where Charlie Patton and Tommy Johnson was another guy. Howlin' Wolf, if you've ever heard of him. Oh, who else from Drew? There's another guy that was important, but I can't think of him right now. But Clarksdale would have guys like, well, Charlie Patton, of course, he was the traveling guy. Muddy Waters, Son House. Well, actually, Son House was from up in Tunica near Memphis. But Son House was one of the guys that taught Muddy and Robert Johnson and even Willie Brown a little bit. But I can go with Charlie Patton. I can give you a little bit of little song here. I might as well just play a little bit of it. When I was a kid in high school, I didn't really listen to the Nirvana and the hip hop stuff. I was sitting there listening to Charlie Patton. I was obsessed with that guy, kind of. I wanted to learn his music. So one of his hits was called Pony Blues. I'll just give you a little snip of it. Oh, my pony, I love my black man. And it's up my pony, I love my black man. I will find me right over, baby, in this world somewhere. Elephant tree, what's the matter with your life? Well, I love my baby all the time. Anyhow, that's a little thing called Pony Blues that he did, and I haven't played that song in about 10 years, but that's about what that thing goes, and there's not a real swing groove to it, but people would dance to the music. You know, he was and kind of a clown or a showman. Played a guitar behind his head, between his legs, you know, just basically a big goofball, you know. But a very important guy that learned from Charlie Patton directly was Howlin' Wolf. And I don't know if y'all are familiar with the Wolf, but he was a big guy in Chicago. Him and Muddy Waters were the two big guys out of Chicago, and you know, they pretty much cleaned up with that stuff. Now Muddy had a little different style. He didn't really play like that Charlie Patton stuff. Son House was the guy that Muddy learned from. I know a lot about Muddy Waters. I got to play with Bob, and you know, every time I talk to him, he'd tell me about stories about Muddy Waters, you know. And I got to play with his son. I was in his band for a little while. I got to play with all these guys from Muddy's band from the 70s. One of the main guys, and he was a very good friend of mine. He was, I guess he was about 90 or so when I played with him, was Pinetop Perkins, and he was from Clarksdale, not Clarksdale, Belzoni, Mississippi. And he grew up on a place called the Hobson Plantation, Hobson, which is outside of Clarksdale. And you can actually go down there. There's an event every year. It's called Pinetop's Homecoming. And they have a big jam, and a bunch of people come down there. I've done that at least one time. I might have done it another time. But I got to play with him. He's a piano player. He was a guitar player first, and then the story is he came out of an outhouse, and some woman was out there probably drunk and thought she was mad at her husband or her man or something, and Pinetop came out of there, and you know, back then they don't have electricity and lights and stuff. So she takes a razor and starts slashing at him, and it cut him right here on his arm. And you can still see the scar. Well, you can't anymore. He's gone now, but you can see the scar across his bicep. So that messed his hand up, and he couldn't play guitar so much anymore. So he switched over to piano and started playing there. And he told me that he was a kid. He was friends with Charlie Patton, and when he was a little boy, kind of I'll get into this in a second about where this music comes from. When he was a boy, Blind Lemon Jefferson played at his school. So he was about 5 or 6 years old, and that's what made him start wanting to play music. So where does this Delta blues come from? What's the foundation of it musically? Like I said, it's kind of, if you ever drive down there, there ain't nothing out there except cotton fields, pretty much. I mean, that's it. So where does the people kind of invented their own sounds? You got little pockets of different sounds in a local area. But one more thing I got to tell you. But I'll say the American music really, if it wasn't for New Orleans, because New Orleans is it kind of had everything. All the sounds came together, and you had jazz, you had blues, this strange beat, rumba music, and all that kind of stuff from I would say the Caribbean. It all got mixed together, you know. So a lot, some of that got up the river there, when people heard that. Blind Lemon Jefferson was a guy. He was one of the first rock stars, you could say. He was blind. He played guitar. There's one picture of him, and he's got glasses on, and it's signed in a nice cursive thing. It says, "Cordially yours, Blind Lemon Jefferson," which I never could figure that out. But I don't know if that was a joke or just some kind of thing where they just said that was it. But Blind Lemon, he was just a monster guitar player. Everybody learned from him. He's one of the guys that formed how people play guitar. The other guy I would say would be Lonnie Johnson from New Orleans, and who was he was kind of a jazz guy that played blues. He could play anything. He was one of the greatest musicians I've ever heard. But anyhow, Pinetop heard Blind Lemon, and then that got him on the musical path. Another guy, well, I'll say Robert Johnson. Everybody likes to talk about Robert Johnson, and I got kind of a bit of connection to him. The guy I learned from, my main influence that taught me music, is a guy named Robert Lockwood Jr., and he's from Turkey Scratch, Arkansas, which you can imagine is probably a very tiny little town. It's kind of near Helena, Arkansas, which and later on they had a radio station there. They would broadcast a radio all around the Delta at lunchtime, and people would tune in to hear that at lunch. And but Robert Jr., he learned from Robert Johnson. Robert Johnson was dating his mother. So for some reason or another, I guess because he was dating his mother, Robert Johnson showed Robert Jr., and they call him Robert Jr. not because of Robert Johnson. That's his real dad's name, but he actually showed him how to play some of this stuff, because Robert Johnson would have some real complicated bass stuff going on and all kinds of stuff on the guitar. So he had like an orchestra in his hand, and then, but the thing is, he only really wrote one song that was original. All the other stuff was basically, he would take stuff off of Leroy Carr, who was a piano player, Lonnie Johnson, big time, Charlie Patton and Son House, Another guy, Willie Brown, who was he's probably one of the greatest guitar players from that time, musicians, but he never wanted to be famous or anything, so he didn't do much. He only recorded about 3 or 4 songs. And Willie Brown, that guy. But anyhow, Robert Jr. Lockwood, I got to hang out with him and learn and sit there. He was my mentor, you could say. And I'll show you, some of the things I learned off of him. There's all kinds. I mean, I've learned jazz. I've learned everything from that guy. But I'm going to say some Robert Johnson stuff. There's a 3220 blues, which is about a pistol that they don't make anymore. It's like a rifle round in the pistol, which they don't make those things anymore. But anyhow, it's kind of a funny song, but a little 3220 blues. If I send for my baby, man, and she don't come. If I send for my baby, man, and she don't come. All the doctors in hot spring sure can't help her none. If she gets unruly, think she don't want to. If she gets unruly, think she don't want to. Take my 3220, cut her half in 2. She got a 38 special, but I believe it's much too light. She got a 38 special, but I believe it's much too light. But my 3220 got to make everything alright. Oh, baby, where'd you stay last night? Oh, baby, where did you stay last night? You got your hair all tangled in, you ain't talking right. It does very well. And my 38 special, it does very well. But my 3220, I swear to God, is a burn in hell. There's just that little Robert Johnson in it for you. Like I said, the one song that he was the original song, and he actually had a hit with it. It's called Terraplane Blues, and he cut it's kind of the same music, the guitar part, but he cut it about 3 or 4 times. And I got to switch the guitar because I got them all tuned up for you. And the reason I use electric guitars is because they're just easier to deal with. And I had a guitar that the same guitar Robert Johnson had, but I gave it to my girlfriend. She just likes to bang around on it a little bit. So one of the things that some of these Delta guys would do would take a bottle, or well, I don't use a knife on my guitar, but they take a jackknife and slide it on the strings. And that's what they call a slide. So the way I was learn how to do it was just stick it on your pinky, and then you just kind of, it gets kind of a vocal sound to it. So there was that Robert Johnson thing was it called Terraplane Blues. Let me give it a sip for you. And this was the only one that he had that was his own thing. And all the rest of them, pretty much, he stole the melodies. The melodies would be coming from somewhere else that he would listen to. So a little Terraplane blues. Well, I feel so lonesome. Don't you hear me when I'm home? Well, I feel so lonesome. Don't you hear me when I'm home? Well, man, driving that tailplane there, baby. You since I've been gone. I wanna hold you, baby. Baby, I'm bound to check your. I'm gonna horse your hood, baby. And I'm bound to check your. And I've got a woman that I'm loving way down in Arkansas. Anyhow, that's a little Terraplane. That was the one song that he kind of created. But I learned the right way and the wrong way to play a lot of that stuff from Robert Lockwood, which his story, he was from Arkansas, around Helena, and hooked up with Robert Johnson. What he did is instead of moving to Chicago yet, he moved to Kansas City, and there was a bunch of jazz guys out there. There was a jazz thing going on there, so he taught those guys how to play blues, and they taught him how to play jazz. And I kind of got that stuff passed down to me, and I'm very, very, very lucky about that. Robert Lockwood pretty much taught he taught everybody. You know, if you ask any of the old blues guys who was the best and where they learned from, it was Robert Lockwood. He solidified a lot of the music. But Son House was another guy. He was kind of a funny guy. Muddy Waters learned from him, certainly, and took it. Robert Johnson took a bunch of stuff from him. He actually lived until 1988. So he was the biggest F-up of all of them, but he outlived all of them too. So, and it was a sad, it's kind of a sad story. He had a hard time in life, but he was a very intense musician. He had that walking blues, and then he had a few of those other preaching the blues, which Robert Johnson took it. But I'm not going to get too hard on that. I got too much to go over. Oh, let's see. When that stuff got up to Chicago, well, let me rewind just a second, because I'll tell you, a lot of people don't know this. I'm from North Carolina. One of my other heroes when I was a kid, when I got all these old records that nobody listened to except me, was a guy named Blind Boy Fuller. He was from a place called Wadesboro, North Carolina, but he was blind, or he got his eyes were messed up. And let me get this other guitar here so I can show you this stuff. I asked Pinetop when he was a kid if he had ever heard Blind Boy Fuller, because he was from Durham, Winston-Salem, Wadesboro area. And he said, "Oh yeah, man, we used to listen to the records and steal all the songs off of them." So that's where a lot of these songs that these Delta guys are getting is that a lot of them are from Blind Boy Fuller. Now, why that is Blind Boy Fuller had cut records in the 30s. and he had distribution in the jukeboxes down through Mississippi and all through the South. He got lucky and got all the distribution on there. So people like Pinetop but I mean, there's a bunch of songs that he did. Jimmy Rogers, even though he's from Georgia, but a lot of the Delta guys would pick the songs up from Blind Boy Fuller off their records, and they had these '78 records that were for sale, and somebody had a Victrola, record player. They would listen to them on that. Now, when I was a kid, Blind Boy's from Durham, so he's like, he's my hero, So one of these songs that was copied a lot, it was Blind Boy's thing. I can't even think of the name of it. Walking My Blues Away or something like that. But I'll try to play this one a little bit. Pinetop had it, I keep on drinking my blues away. And then I don't know if he came up with that one, because I've heard other people do it too. But they just change the words up. That's how you get along in the music business. You just change it up a little bit, and now it's your song. But so he changed it up a bit. But I'm going to try that one here. It's called "Walking My Blues Away." Paper boy hollering extra, have you read the news? Shot the gal I love, I got them walking blues. I keep on walking, trying to walk my blues. Well, now I'm so glad trouble don't last always. Well, now you used to be my sweet milk, but you soured on me. Can't be together like we used to be. I keep on walking, trying to walk my blues away. Yes, and I'm so glad trouble don't last always. So that's the thing. That's one of the things that they stole off of the jukebox, And let me think about anything else that's really important. Jimmy Reed. Okay, Jimmy Reed was a guy. He was one of the big hit makers. I should get in Jimmy Reed, Muddy, and Wolf. Jimmy Reed was a guy that the guy that he learned from was his guitar player. He was a harmonica player, and he was backing up a guy named Eddie Taylor. And both of these guys are from down in that way too. Jimmy Reed was actually the backup guitar player on the recording session, and then they had some extra tape left over, and on the Eddie Taylor session. And they said, well, I got a couple of songs, so they cut a couple of his, and his wound up being the big hits. But that little shuffle pattern, everybody likes to dance to that. You've heard, everybody's heard that thing. It's a kind of a staple. Howlin' Wolf, he was about out of that Drew, Mississippi area, and he learned from Charlie Patton right directly. As he actually took guitar lessons from him, and took some harmonica lessons from Sonny Boy. We got some time to get into that. Wolf, he was just this big dude and had to just weird voice. First time I ever heard him, I thought he was, I didn't know what that was because it sounded like some alien, from outer space, Howlin' Wolf. I got to play with his guitar player. His right-hand man was Hubert Sumlin, who helped create a lot of those sounds. And they played these same stock songs. You add your own thing to it, and that's what you do. But Hubert, I got to play a bunch with him, and he was a good friend of mine. One of the nicest people you ever want to meet. But Wolf had the thing called Smokestack Lightning, which he stole from what's his name, Tommy Johnson. Everybody's heard that little thing, but he also had a couple. What that comes from is Tommy Johnson. Oh, tell me, baby, that's the Wolf's thing. But I'll wake my neighbors up if I raise my voice on it. But that brings me to another very, very important song that I'm just thinking of. It's a song. The song is probably so old. Who knows who came up with it? It was probably came up with before anybody ever recorded it. But the first guy to record it was a guy named Tommy McLennan, who he recorded for Bluebird Records back in the 30s and maybe the 40s. A little song called Catfish Blues is the main thing everybody does, and Muddy Waters turned it into Rolling Stone. That's where they got their name from, and that's where they got the magazine from and all that. A little song called Rolling Stone, and it's just one chord, but it has a certain melody to it. I'll play that one a little bit for you. Well, I'm gone, sure enough I'm gone. Baby, and your crying won't make me stay. Well, now the more you cry, will you drive me away? Will you drive me away? Oh, Lord, now. Oh, well, now. Hold on. Well, I went to my baby's house. Baby, now sat on the step. Well, she said, come on in now, buddy. But you just now left. Just now left. Oh, well, now. Oh, well, now. Hold on. Well, that's the melody for Catfish Blues. And there's been a million songs taken off of that melody. You can hear it sometimes in pop music every once in a while, believe it or not. But that song is old. It's just old. Nobody really knows who wrote it. Muddy Waters. Okay. That's the guy that kind of made the big hit back in the 1950, I believe. He had a big hit with a song that he made himself. It's called "I Can't Be Satisfied," and he had a band together. It was 4 guys. One of them was Jimmy Rogers, who was another guitar player. I got to meet him one time, and he's one of the nicest people in the world. But the other guy on the drums and the singer was Babyface Leroy. He played drums and sang, and then the harmonica player is Little Walter Jacobs, and he was about 18 or something when he cut this stuff and just kind of redefined the harmonica. He was with Muddy Waters, and they made big hit records. And then Little Walter went on his own and made hit records, and he quit Muddy's band. And then Muddy got Junior Wells, who was another kid. He was even younger than Walter. He had Walter Horton, Big Walter Horton. So you got Little Walter, and you got Big Walter. There's two different guys. Big Walter was a little older. He was an older guy from Memphis, and just a ridiculous harmonica player. But I'll show you just a little bit of the harmonica. Little Walter would kind of revolutionize this instrument and added aspects of jazz. And but he's from Louisiana, so he had that Cajun style of music. And the harmonica is a close cousin to the accordion, so you can get a lot of these same accordion sounds. So Little Walter he was just a genius, and that's all there is to it. And he had a short, tragic life, and that's a terrible thing. But everybody, I don't think there'll ever be a better harmonica player than him. But he certainly revolutionized blues music with the harmonica. So I'll just play a little bit of the harmonica, where he got it from. The main guy that started the blues harmonica was a guy named Sonny Boy Williamson. There was two of them. The real one, and then the other guy. That's a long story. I don't want to take up too much time on that. But the real Sonny Boy was from Jackson, Tennessee. And he had records out, and when he put the records out, everybody would buy harmonicas because they wanted to copy that sound. They wanted to be Sonny Boy. And I'll just play I think of one that he can do, Sugar Mama, one of his hit records. I'll just do that one on the harmonica. Now, sugar mama, tell me where you get your little sugar from. Sugar mama, tell me where you get your sugar from. Tell me you got it way down in Georgia, way down your daddy's sugar farm. Well, baby, tell me where you been so long. Whoa, baby, tell me where you been so long. You've been hanging around me, sugar mama. God knows what's going on. So that's a little bit of the harmonica thing, which would it adds real good with the guitar and the piano and everything when the music all comes together. Real quick about some of these other styles that they call Delta blues. Let me just think real quick. There's another guy that's pretty important. In Mississippi, there's a thing called hill country blues, which is it's kind of up there, a little east of the Delta. It's not really in the Delta; it's in the hills. You know, the Delta is a flat plain, and they kind of got a little different style up there. Whoops. Oh. Stay up there. One of the guys that was he's not really from there. He was actually from Clarksdale around there. But he had a big impact on that music was John Lee Hooker. I got to meet him one time, Pinetop. And they'd play in a what they call an open G tuning, or they call it Spanish tuning. I don't know why they call it Spanish tuning. I guess there was a song called Spanish Fandango, and I just thought of that now. If I'd have known, I would have worked it up for you. But anyhow, Muddy Waters would you just use this a lot with the slide. John Lee Hooker used this tuning. Fred McDowell was another guy from the hill country. And then later on, a guy named R.L. Burnside. He has grandsons that play, and they're out there doing it right now. Got one guy named Cedric Burnside. He's out there tearing it up. He played drums, and actually he plays guitar too, but he usually plays drums, and he has another guy playing guitar with him. But they're out there killing it right now. So if you see an advertisement for Cedric Burnside, go check him out. Real nice fella too. R.L., Fred McDowell, they would play that John Lee Hooker stuff, but it's real straight. There's not many chord changes. It's all dance music. It's just constant dance music. And I'll try to play some of that stuff here. There's a little R.L. stuff that I learned. One of my friends, when I was in high school, when he graduated high school, he went down to Mississippi around Holly Springs, is where R.L.'s from, and played with him and learned about how to do all this stuff. And then I picked up a couple of things off of him. But another guy that I knew was Robert Belfer, and he actually moved to Memphis, which is not far from Memphis. All this stuff is not far from Memphis. But I'll try to play one of these R.L. things. You get some like a little drone thing going on. People, if you play it long enough, people will start dancing to it. If you play it rhythmically enough, then the girls would get up there and start dancing to it. So. But John Lee Hooker had the same tuning kind of thing, and just kind of the same kind of drone almost. And you can take the sound, so it almost sounds like the chord is changing, but not really. So if you study it musically, if you sit there and try to pick it apart, you're gonna fail, because it's just about the sound is really what it is. So I'll try to show you what I'm talking about. Well, I'm a crawling king snake, and I rule my den. I'm a crawling king snake, and I rule my den. I watch around my maid. I want to use it for my friend. Well, now you caught me crawling, baby. Grass was very high. We'll keep on crawling, darling, until the day I die. I'm a crawling king, and I rule my den. Around you round my maid, I want to use it for my That's an old John Lee Hooker thing. And, he had the other tuning that he would play would be E natural, which would be the standard thing that I got the Stratocaster. boom, boom, and all that stuff was in the other thing. So he had basically 2 tricks that he would do on the guitar, 3 tricks really, but yeah, that's about it. That's about all he had, but he knew how to make it sound good. So he got people to dance. He would tap his feet, and he could do it by himself a lot. But anyhow, I should probably take some questions if anybody has any questions about anything.
Yeah, we appreciate the time you've taken so far. Andrew, who's going to be here, he has a question, and that is, how do you feel that blues music has changed or evolved since you first started out? And have you found that modern blues compositions have changed in structure or style? And how are people getting creative with that style while trying to remain true to origins?
That's a good question. I hate to be like, I'm not as bad now as I used to be. I used to be kind of a music snob, kind of, like, well, that's not the way so and so played it, And I think, well, I'm a humongous Jimi Hendrix fan. He's probably my second favorite guitar player next to Robert Lockwood. So that guy took music itself. I mean, he took blues. Sometimes, a lot of times, his blues stuff I don't really dig it so much. But he took just music itself and just elevated it. So you see where he came from is kind of the same where I come from. He listened to Muddy Waters a lot. I mean, he tried out for Muddy Waters' band one time, and Muddy declined him because he already had another guitar player in the band, and Muddy was very, very loyal to his guys. If he wasn't just going to say, all right, you're fired, I got this guy in here. But anyhow, the way things have changed musically, if you can talk technical musical stuff about chord changes and arrangements and stuff like that, adding horns, somebody like T-Bone Walker from Texas would have a big horn section. Gatemouth Brown from Texas had horns. So that's a whole. They played jazz. They played what they call blues. That's a whole different. It can do another hour on that. But one of the things that people, especially musicians, when they're trying to play blues, I don't think they respect the music so much. It's not so much about chord changes. What is it? They'll say, well, I'm just going to play a 12-bar blues. A lot of the songs that I play, that we play all the time, if you actually sit there and count it, it's not 12 bars, and the chord changes are not always those things that you see when you pick up your first blues instruction. They usually do that kind of thing. You can sit there and learn, and that's how you start out. But composition, you take the music, you take the foundation in that music, and you bring out your own thing in it, and that's what you do. Some of the great ones, I'll say, is Jimi Hendrix, number one. The Fabulous Thunderbirds, Jimmy Vaughn is another. That guy is just a genius. He got his little brother started, who everybody knows is Stevie Ray Vaughan, and he had a band called the Fabulous Thunderbirds, and from Austin, Texas, and kind of put more rock and roll to it. Chuck Berry had some rock and roll. Muddy Waters got him started, by the way. Muddy, a lot of stuff always comes back to Muddy. Muddy got a lot of people started in the business, and he liked Chuck Berry, and he hooked him up with the record company. Bo Diddley is another guy. He could play some blues. A lot of it is not really what you would call blues. It's just old rhymes and old melodies and he was one of the great rock and roll founders of rock and roll. Billy Boy Arnold, my friend that played with him back in the 50s on his first records, was a harmonica player. And he did a fair amount of innovation himself. Nowadays, you got a guy named Robert Cray, who I don't know if y'all have heard of him. He has taken the music to another level, I think, with his innovations on songwriting. The way he what they call arranging all the chords. I mean, it's almost like it's not. I mean, he takes elements of jazz, but that guy can downright tear it up on some blues stuff too. And he can take it and just make it interesting. A lot of times with if you're just going to play the same old stuff, because a lot of people try to play blues, but they just rehash the same thing. You have to come up with your own thing, something different, and you just keep trying something new until something works. That's the way I look at it. I try to do that myself with some of my songwriting stuff I do. But Robert Cray, check him out because he's just a monster as well. I hope that answers the question.
All right. So Nadia has a question that she'd like to ask.
Okay, doke. I can't hear you, hon.
Oh, her internet's bad, so I think she might type it and I can read it out.
Okay.
So. All right, here's her question. So she said, you said that in the music business, people just tend to borrow from each other and make it their own, but in the news, there's often intellectual property lawsuits, especially in pop music, but in the blues world, that doesn't seem like the case. So
Well, it all depends. Here's an example. A guy named Elmore James, who I forgot to mention, another guy from the Delta, who played slide guitar, and his biggest hit was called "Dust My Broom," which is basically a Robert Johnson song. That was another one. Actually, that one might be another one that he actually invented. It's a little. I'm not sure who he got. I think he might have got that thing from a guy named Kokomo Arnold. I can name people off. I mean, there's just a bunch of people that created this stuff. But Elmore James had this song, and it's done. He played it with a slide. Robert Johnson wasn't around to sue him. Nowadays, it's you kind of just take the notes. I mean, you can't really. I think you can't copyright a melody, but you can copyright words. I believe. I might be very mistaken on that, but the melody. If you're worried about getting a copyright, well, just change one little note, and then you'll get away with it. Mostly in the blues world, you know, we all know each other. It's kind of a small world, and we all, most of us are friends with each other. So we say, well, if you learn something from so and so, then say, all right, man, I got your stuff, and then you know, it's back and forth. You know, it's kind of like talking to each other with the music. So it's not cutthroat like, say, the pop industry, which is kind of disgusting in my opinion. But in the blues business, there's not a lot of money to be worried about. So people don't really usually worry about it, I don't think. I may be wrong. I mean, there's all kinds of people out there. But if you take a song, if you want to take somebody's song and, well, you would learn from it. So, oh, that's cool. I'm going to take that, but I'm going to change it a little bit. And then make it my own little thing. So that's, I mean, that's pretty much what you do with it. Everybody learns, has a history, and they learn from somebody else. You know, does that make sense?
Yep, I think so. And Nadia says it does too.
Okay.
So, Emily, did you have a question that you wanted to ask? I think we have time for one more. Alrighty, well, I think that is time then. Thank you for your time and for playing all that music for us and talking to us about some of these fantastic artists who came out of the Delta.
All right. Well, I appreciate y'all having me.
Yep. And until next time, thanks for joining us, everybody.
All right. Y'all be safe.